I'm going to bring in some dear guests to discuss that victory speech with, first off, our man in Washington, D.C., an always contributor, Colin Campbell, via Skype, as well as Mr. Kristan T. Harris with Free and Equal Election Foundation out of Milwaukee. Gentlemen, it's good to have you with us. I'm going to begin with Colin to fill us in on the latest situation, not only where he is, but what he's hearing is happening and is basically the mood of the nation right now, Colin.
Well, the vice president, now the president-elect, was speaking to us from Wilmington, Delaware. And as we know, he lives in Delaware. This is home for him. This is where he felt the most grounded. And what we heard the president-elect speak was on a number of notes that have resonated with Americans. One of them promoting a united America rather than a divided America. For the past 4 years, we've seen a president who has been relatively divisive, let's put it honestly, pitting red states against blue states, Christians against Muslims, those who are financially elite versus those who are financially disadvantaged, and so on and so forth. And what we had from this president-elect was someone who wanted to put forth a message of unity, one of faith and hope. We heard him talking about hope. We heard him talking about spreading the faith. He said that the U.S. would lead by the power of example, not an example of power, which is pretty much antithetical to what we've been seeing for the past several years from the current administration. And he talked about the number of people who died from COVID-19, something that we often don't hear the leader talk about coming from the executive branch. We also heard him talking about systemic racism, something else that the current president has been loath to talk about. And from the vice president-elect, she talked about the empowerment of women from different backgrounds and ethnicities. These are all issues that the current administration doesn't often talk about, but a lot of Americans, as you can see from the vote count, wanted to hear from their leadership. And a number of Americans voted for the former vice president in record numbers, capturing about 4 million votes, more than former President Barack Obama, who previously had the record for the most number of votes casted for him. So again, this was a show from Americans that they wanted something different, that they wanted messages that not only honored their different heritages and backgrounds and experiences, but one that could promote a message that together we are stronger as a nation rather than being divided, and so that we can be at each other's throats and create suspicion amongst each other. So I think this is a winning message for the former vice president as he thinks about his transition. Now, whether or not the transition will work out, well, that remains to be seen. We don't know if the current president will make a concession speech. He hasn't alluded as much, but he has until about January 20th. So it could be some exciting times until then. As we do know, the current president has filed a number of lawsuits challenging the election results in some of the most key battleground states.
Okay, Colin, of course, we're going to be discussing that a little bit more, but right now I'm going to give the floor to Kristan T. Harris to give us what he thinks about, well, that victory speech and, of course, the impact that it will have, the language that was basically used by both the vice president-elect and president-elect. And how do you see it, sir?
Well, I think that America is very divided. I think that the decision to announce him as a winner right now at this moment, while it's coming out that there's different glitches in the system, there's different counting issues, different cities are reporting different shenanigans, and it's really close in a lot of these states. Wisconsin, they're separated by less than 20,000 votes. You can go to Pennsylvania, all these different swing states. Also, you can take a look at some of the algorithms that are out there where, you know, Democratic senators are not achieving similar voting results as Joe Biden did. For voting for Joe Biden. So I can understand why it's very divided. Also, Joe Biden's intent was to be unifier. It wouldn't have been called this early. There would have been a little bit more time, and everyone expected there to be a decent amount of time to go through all this to make sure voting was done properly. think that's going to create more division than it really will help, just the way he's handling it to start with.
Yeah, okay, but let's just focus on the speech itself. And Kristan, what I want to ask you is, do you think with all that you said, and of course, I'm pretty sure that, people with open eyes like yourself will also see that. Do you think speeches like that, and of course, if he is going to keep his word for it, but, after all, it's a part of his promise and pledge that he made to not only America, but the whole world was watching his pre-election speeches. You think he's going to keep it? And basically, will it really change everything for the better in a country that has, I would say, in recent history has never been divided as it is now?
I have to say, if a police officer, there's police brutality, I don't think it matters who is president. We're going to have some kind of issues here in America. I don't think it's going to really change that much. If anything, it has continued on the tribalism we're seeing here in America. Could Joe Biden be a unifier? Very much so. I think the media is on his side. I think that will help out a lot. I don't know if he'll be as peaceful as Donald Trump has as far as foreign policy. There's a lot of things here we can get into, but I think that Joe Biden, he at least portrays that his rhetoric is there, that he is going to be a unifier. And I think that there might be an overall consensus by a lot of liberals that will be the case. Now, whether or not that's the truth, I guess we don't really know. We'll have to wait and see.
Okay. I'm going to get back to Colin Washington now. Colin, you tell us. I'm pretty sure that you have your analytical view of how this will go after the election and, of course, after the speech. Tell me your understanding of how do you think things will turn out, both in terms, of course, you talked about this a little, both in terms of how unified the nation can be given the current circumstances, and as well as you also mentioned Donald Trump not wanting to leave office peacefully. How do you see these two things will go, perhaps, in the next few weeks or months?
Well, I do think that the current president will try to put up some resistance to leaving the White House, trying to, of course, file lawsuits, trying to challenge the election results, as I talked about. He's already done that. He hasn't said that he will concede. There's been very little discussion about that. You do have members of the Trump administration already challenging the results and saying that there's lots of voter fraud, that the vote was rigged, that this was a plot by liberals, of course. This is not uncommon from the administration. It's pretty much on the level with rhetoric we've been hearing throughout the past several weeks. But as far as after the transition, when Joe Biden becomes president, if that happens, and it's most likely he will, I do believe the American people, for the most part, will hold him accountable for some of the things he talked about in his speech tonight, which is trying to unite the nation, which is trying to advocate for the interests of people who voted for him, but also for the people who didn't vote for him. Now, saying that is not going to win over all of the Democrats. It's not going to win over all of the quote unquote liberals. They actually would like to see him a bit more combative, almost to the level of the current president. But he has been in politics for almost 50 years. He's brokered with people he disagrees with. And I think he's going to stay true to that mission so that more things could get accomplished. If he stays as dogmatic as some of the progressives or more left-leaning liberals would like him to, there may not be much done, as it is indicated that the Senate will be in the power of Republicans. So he's going to have to work with Republicans. He won't be able to be as recalcitrant when it comes to working with people who are partisanly different from how he affiliates. So I do believe he will have to work with them. I do believe that he will have to advocate for the interests of the people he acknowledged help him get to where he is. He talked about the Black American vote. He talked about the Asians. He talked about Latinos, Latinx. He talked about women. All of these people he knows he owes something to as far as advocacy is concerned when defending their interests in a political fashion. If it wasn't for these groups, then he might not be where he is now. And I think he realizes that. I think the vice president-elect will also hold him accountable for that, reminding him, if necessary, that he won this presidency because of the interests of the people who got him there. And that is a broad coalition of Americans, not just white males, not just lower educated white males, or any of these really specific demographics or the status quo. It's a lot more. It encompassed white males, it encompassed white females, black females, and so on and so forth. And I think that it's important to remember that as we look and analyze the Biden presidency. Will he make do on the promises that he will advocate and push for the interests of these various groups that helped launch him to the presidency? If we remember, he was not looking like he was going to be the primary winner, the leader of the Democratic Party to run for the presidency. It wasn't until Jim Clyburn from South Carolina, representative from South Carolina, who helped get him to get the black vote, which helped him in the primary vote. So I think this is very important for people to realize that there were people from various ethnicities that helped him get to to get to president-elect status.
And that's a very good question I want to put to Mr. Harris there to give us an answer to. If you can, please, Mr. Harris, you know better than I, politicians, presidents, people running for president basically, make all kinds of promises. But when it comes to them taking office, basically, you really have to wait and see if they really will stay faithful to those promises. What do you think is going to be? And there has been no exception, except for Donald Trump actually saying before he was elected president of the United States that he's going to start a wall on the Mexico border, that he's going to leave the JCPOA, the Iranian nuclear deal, which he did, by the way. But right now, Joe Biden, speaking of people and speaking of, systemic racism in the country, and of course a lot of other promises, just as our man, Dr. Colin Campbell, just said, promises that were made to people of color. How do you think in that front, what kind of a politician do you think, given his past, he has been, or do you think that he's again going to fall back into the norm that so many politicians around the world have shown in not staying faithful to their promises? Please.
Well, I think as far as we have to go back is the 8 years he served with Barack Obama and how they handled that and what they accomplished. A lot of the, different issues we're tackling today could be tied to them, not saying that they're blamed for that. He's going to have to take a different path, and like you mentioned, he has big shoes to fill. One thing, whether you love him or hate him, Donald Trump generally tried to accomplish what he said, which is something we haven't really seen much in politics. Not that I agree with everything that he did, pulling out of TPP. He put America first, and I think that's what a lot of the conservative and blue-collar people in the Midwest really liked about him. But the weakness was he wasn't very a globalist or very keen on globalism. He always focused on putting America first. And so Joe Biden, I believe, is more of a globalist, and I think that we'll be looking at more of a United Nations type, future, or at least that style of globalist ideology. We're already seeing it with the World Health Organization kind of branching out and affecting our local politics with COVID-19. And I don't vote for anyone to represent me at the United Nations or these organizations. But, I think Joe Biden has this ability. If he really wanted to push it a different direction, he has that systemic racism, obviously. Police brutality is a top topic right now. As a person that's been down in the nitty-gritty there in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and even at the 3rd Precinct in Minneapolis, I can tell you that there's a lot of division, but there's very little that separates a lot of Americans these days. And we're learning more and more that, both parties are basically two sides of the same coin. So, is there really going to be a difference? The things we're talking about can be solved by, like, for example, blockchain voting. We'd have a lot more security and understanding of the vote totals, and we'd have more faith in these politicians. Just like Donald Trump and the whole Russiagate thing, there's going to be, I think, 4 years of questioning whether or not Joe Biden is a legitimate candidate, and there's going to be half of America that's going to struggle to support this unless they see some real change.
Very interesting. The two parties, two sides of the same coin, and that's going to be my last question from Dr. Colin Campbell in Washington, D.C. Colin, very briefly, please, how much do you think what Mr. Harris said is the case in America?
try to push as much as he can, but there will be a limit. Let's face it, the reason why he won is not because he's very progressive, not because he's going to launch America into this new paradigm of equity for everyone. It's because he was the most moderate candidate that a lot of Americans thought would beat the incumbent. And that's how he got to where he is today. So he has already said he's not going to ban fracking, for example, which is something that environmentalists really would like him to do. He hasn't said that he's going to do a single-payer healthcare system where the government just runs healthcare like in a lot of developed nations. He just wants to build on the Affordable Care Act. So he's already been somewhat tepid in his approach to what he wants to accomplish. Now, it'll be interesting to see, again, how much he does accomplish, how much he does push, but I think that we need to have limited expectations of this president-elect because of what he campaigned on. And that is not overwhelming sea change as a progressive. That is moderate, Shalonian, incremental steps to change that could possibly set up his successor. A lot of people don't think that he will run for another term once this one is over.
All right. Many thanks, Dr. Colin Campbell, our man in Washington, D.C. And, of course, I'd like to thank Mr. Kristan T. Harris with Free and Equal Elections Foundation out of Milwaukee via Skype for his time. Gentlemen, thank you.